Outkick 360 is back. Glad you're with us across the Outkick network alongside Chad Withrow and Paul Kuharsky. I'm Jonathan Hutton. A lot to get to today. Dane Bradshaw from the SEC Network about to preview the Sweet 16 with us coming up in about 15 minutes. Tennessee Power Hour in hour number 2 to kick off the afternoon as the Tennessee Volunteers, for instance, kick off spring practice. A lot to discuss there. Gentlemen, hope you're doing well. Good morning.
I'm doing very well, Hutton, and you said it's a big show today. They're all big. That's going to be our mantra throughout, and today is no different.
Looking forward to some more basketball this weekend and talking about those games with Dane. And Hutton gave us an off-show tease that he's going to deliver on now as we run through some headlines to open.
FanDuel.com/OK360 is the website. 30-1 odds on any team in the tournament right now, which means you can get the Zags for 30-1 odds by signing up at FanDuel.com/OK360. It's a great offer. Restrictions do apply. Check it out for first-time users across the state of Tennessee and beyond. FanDuel.com/OK360. A couple of headlines out there
How does
today.
one not do that, by the way?
Oh,
if you hear that offer and you hear if you just by signing up and depositing a little bit of money, you can get 30-1 odds with an offer like this. I see some of these offers from FanDuel, and I think to myself, who wouldn't do that? So do it. That's what I'm saying. Just go ahead and do it. You know you want to. Do it.
Win 150. 30-1 odds right now. FanDuel.com/OK360. Let's get it rolling. So the Washington football team, they have floated out this idea that they are considering just keeping the name Washington football team. This on the same day that Daniel Snyder, the reports are that he is purchasing the remaining 40.5% shares of the Washington franchise, which would include Fred Smith's shares of the team. So if that's approved at the owners' meetings, he's going to own 100% of the team. Also, the Chicago Bears yesterday tweeted out a photo of Andy Dalton with the hashtag QB1. And it got me thinking, are these PR teams smart enough to float bad ideas out and see a fan reaction to allow a fan base to feel like they affected change in the decision?
Well, on Washington, I mean, this has been floating since the initial reaction wasn't bad and the merchandise sold. That it'd be awfully unique for Washington to be like, European soccer teams. And MLS has done a lot of this, but your Chelsea football club, you don't really have a mascot. And that's a tradition of football teams, which are soccer teams in Europe. And so it's unique in that regard, and you'd be unique in that regard. I think I saw their new team president lately saying, like, in our research, what's been shown to be important to our fans is that it have some link to our history and not just be a rewrite, a restart, if you will. And so that's why Red Tails and Red Hawks,
the Washington Phoenix
have
won't
been
play as well.
Important or well received. So that's interesting to me. I don't know, to me, what you're suggesting is you're kind of making fun of yourself when you put out Dalton as QB1 if you're saying, let's see how badly we get roasted on this idea.
Why would you declare that March 24th?
Yeah.
Why would you tweet out QB1 with Andy Dalton?
You know why? Because you need content, and I'm telling you,
you don't need content. This is terrible content.
It's terrible content, but this is where the team is at odds with being a media company and being a football team. Because the media department, while beholden to the football side, needs constant content because it's now also a media company. And on March 24th, it doesn't have a lot of content. And so the social media department, if the coach and the GM say, go ahead and do your thing, does something like sends that tweet, gets a lot of hits on Twitter and is, quote unquote, doing its job. And the football department says, I don't care what the social media.
Getting roasted by literally everyone. That's what it did.
Well,
if the football department hated it so much, though, Paul, why didn't they tell them to delete it?
Well, right. I don't
so
know
that's what I feel like the football
hated
department's
that
behind
much.
it.
I think it's any attention is good attention kind of thing.
No.
No, not with this.
Oh, man. And I don't buy into that either. I mean, 100% negative attention is bad attention.
By the way, Andy Dalton as quarterback one in Chicago is a major upgrade.
No one likes it. I mean, it's still
It's a significant
it's still
upgrade.
bad. Now, I will say, if you're doing something like a logo release or a new uniform, would you intentionally float something that's really bad early, where either you have an alternative to see what the backup plan is,
Or you're taking a temperature.
or you're intentionally misleading your fans to think it's something bad and then it's something good. There's a local example when we had our old show with the Nashville Sounds, where if you remember, they floated this color scheme that was
I don't think they
awful.
were floating it. I think they were really doing it.
They announced it and it was terrible.
Well, either
We
way,
helped
I don't
get
know.
them
I don't
off
know
that.
what happened, but they announced that it was terrible. We
It was
bashed it.
beige. It was beige.
Others
The
bashed it.
color of vomit.
They came back quickly and changed it. So
Quickly.
either they had that as a backdrop, or they were intentionally floating something bad to come back and say, now look how great this new scheme is and this
much
new
better.
logo is. I think you're on to something, Hutton. I also think that
Okay.
there are just there's a lot of really smart people who run social media and marketing, and there's a few really dumb people that run social media and marketing, and maybe some dumb people made the decision to do that. There's also sometimes the simplest explanation is the explanation, and maybe that's what
Occam's
it is.
razor.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, Occam's razor.
I'm a
Maybe
big
the Occam's razor is just a really dumb social media person that thought that was a good idea.
And sometimes those people go further than they should, take more leeway. Back to Washington for a second. On Snyder, probably approved next week at the owners' meetings for this ownership. I don't like the timing of it. The team's under investigation still for things run amok with not domestic issues, mistreatment of women in the organization issues, and more, with Daniel Snyder having a terrible, terrible reputation. Now, I don't believe the leagues can really control ownership to the degree that a lot of people would like to see, and I understand that. Donald Sterling being the one big exception that we've seen that I could recall. But with Daniel Snyder in the midst of that investigation and the complaints from his smaller fraction owners who want out, I understand. So I guess you're doing them a favor letting them out. But you say to Daniel Snyder, as a reward for you completely stinking up one of the great organizations in league history, we're going to let you assume total control. The 40% that you don't have, you can now have. Because you
Well, he already had total control.
Well, right. But in terms of the stakeholder.
Now he's got 100%.
Now you
where he
will
had
have
60%.
100%. So the people that you've stepped on and the organizational flaws that you have that we're investigating that could lead to some serious consequences, we're going to give you more. We're going to approve more. It seems ridiculous to me timing-wise.
Well, here's my question, and I'm not saying that the NFL needs more control over ownership or over anything in their league.
But they do have control in terms of voting
Well, and you
approval.
said it, Paul, that there's
Two-thirds,
certain
right?
things that they won't do or can't do with ownership. But how is it that they can go about colluding to keep certain people from buying a team? It has to have universal approval from those owners to allow someone to come into the good old boys club.
2/3 or 3/4 of
Right.
the vote.
But they can do that, but yet they can't also get together and say this guy or girl's got to go. It's weird to me that they can keep someone out, but they can't kick someone out. And again, I'm not saying that they should have that power, but if they have the power to say, Major League Baseball, for instance, Mark Cuban's not going to be an owner.
Right.
He has long argued that I rub people the wrong way. They will not let me buy the Cubs. They will not let me buy a Major League Baseball team, and I badly want a baseball team. If baseball and football and all these leagues can say, you can't come in, Paul Kuharsky's a billionaire, but Paul Kuharsky cannot be an owner and cannot be in our club, then if Daniel Snyder's such a problem, why can't they also on the flip side say, Daniel Snyder's out?
I think they could.
They can.
They could. They won't.
Why?
Because
I'm
he's
saying if they're willing to
old-
take the steps
Right.
to not allow someone to buy a team that has the money, why can't they also take the steps to get someone like Daniel Snyder out?
Because he's been there, his money has helped them. because they don't want change in that direction, right, Hud?
Well, let's be honest. It's the selfishness aspect. You want to set a precedent for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
very
why
good.
you don't vote him out.
Yeah, right. When
You
I
could be the
screw up.
next one.
Yeah.
Yes. They don't want to set that tone.
Yeah, you're absolutely
That's
right.
the reason.
Well, and I do wonder if when Donald Sterling was kicked out, if there were owners in the NBA sitting around thinking, boy, if I get involved in
Hope
some
I'm
sort of
not tape
controversy,
recorded.
then now I'm going to be the next one that's out. It's a little different, too, because the NBA is not a guaranteed ATM the way the NFL is. I mean, if Daniel Snyder got kicked out of NFL ownership, you'd have billionaires lining up to buy an NFL team because it's going to print money.
I think an
The
NBA
return on
team's
investment's
a pretty
gonna be
good
quick.
Purchase, isn't it? A pro sports team, period's a pretty good purchase.
There are
if you could get
NBA
an MLS team right now, you'd take it.
you would take an NBA team before you would an NHL team, but an NBA team is not the guaranteed money
No, I
maker
mean
that an
NFL
NFL team
is king for a reason.
Right.
But I think if you could get a pro sports franchise in America as a purchase, you're taking it. If you have that kind of money, I mean it's a pretty consistent return on investment.
I'm not so sure that if an NHL team opened up that they wouldn't have a hard time
with the
finding an
money.
owner.
NHL maybe is a little different. We had this conversation about a Canadian team losing money pre-pandemic, having trouble with a hotel bill. That's a story all of its own.
Jadeveon Clowney making a free agent visit in Cleveland. That's
can't-
where he met last offseason as well, and ended up not signing with the Browns then. But there is interest in Clowney yet again.
There's a headline at Pro Football Talk on a video. Would Jadeveon Clowney throw the Browns over the top? I mean, I just can't understand how he's viewed as that kind of guy. I think maybe he's a piece for somebody in some way. But, I mean, do you put him in any way, shape, or form as a guy who's going to throw a team over the top? They're looking to replace Olivier Vernon, who I guess is in limbo. Is he coming off an Achilles? Am I remembering that correctly?
We need to do a study. This reminds me of something, Paul. We need to do a study one day on bad headline writers. Because I'm curious. I see that headline. I think that's really idiotic. What you just brought up
I
about the
think they were
Browns and
talking
Clowney.
about it. I think they had a conversation.
But I would love to go in
about
and read the story and see if that's what the story's actually
I think it
saying.
was a video
Because there's a
headline.
lot of bad headlines out there that's meant to grab attention, and then you go into the story, and that's not what they're discussing at all.
I think this was a video headline, and I
Okay.
bet it is a part of what they were discussing. I just keep seeing him on remaining free agent lists and everything, and he ranks very high to me. I was going to send an email to a friend of mine who's in one of those and say, these 5 people behind him, I can't believe they're not going to be more impactful players next year than he was.
Coming up, PK will tell the story of the naked intruder from, 2 years ago? We tell the backstory.
maybe.
Paul tells the backstory. That's in about 30 minutes. But we preview the Sweet 16 with a friend of the show and a great analyst for the SEC Network, Dane Bradshaw, former Tennessee Volunteer, joins us next on Outkick 360. Outkick 360 on the Outkick Network. Glad you're with us with Chad Withrow and Paul Kuharsky. I'm Jonathan Hutton. Big thanks to Lance Lee, Jacob Swanson, and David Reed for making the show happen. Pleased to be joined as we preview and switch gears, talk some Sweet 16 action coming up this weekend. Dane Bradshaw joins us. He is a studio and game analyst for the SEC Network. Dane, it is great to have you on the show. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Congrats on the new gig and the new show, podcast, whatever you want to call it. But hope it's going well.
It's all under the same umbrella. We appreciate it,
We
man.
don't even know what to call it yet, Dane, so your guess is as good as ours. Call it whatever the heck you want.
How do you what do you call this tournament? With the 16 teams that remain combined for the highest seed total ever. What's been the reason to you as to why we saw so many upsets through the first two rounds?
I don't know that I can pinpoint it. I guess maybe some of it could be the fatigue of the season. You could point to some of it maybe without the typical crowds and teams just not gelling as much. And then, of course, your perennial blue bloods that you expect to kind of be in the Sweet 16 every single year. When you remove the Michigan States, the Dukes, the Kentuckys, of course, that opens up a few spots for maybe some more of these Cinderellas. As opposed to the normal faces that you see in there. So, it's been a crazy year. It's been fun. But look, the other part is, these majors are really good. They're talented. They can shoot the ball. They can defend. And, the separation just really isn't that far when you compare those teams against some of the others right now.
Dane, when I watch Loyola Chicago, I don't see a Cinderella. And I don't see a team that looks like they don't belong. I see a team that could be top 15 throughout the year, and they're playing like it right now. When you watch them play, what are your thoughts about how good this team is, and now with an opportunity against a 12 seed in Oregon State, just how far they could go in this tournament?
It's interesting. I had them the year they made their Final Four run at Florida where they upset the Gators, and their big man, Cameron Krutwig, was just a freshman. And, I'm watching film on them before the game, and I'm seeing them, and I'm talking to Porter Moser at the shoot-around. I'm like, that Krutwig kid, he's kind of a point center for you. And I go, am I overthinking that? He goes, no. He was like, I'm telling you, he's one of the best passing big man you ever see. It allows us to just run our offense 15 feet and in through him. Now, I did not see them making the run. I didn't think they'd be as good as they were. But man, that guy has been the heart and soul of that program. And you're exactly right. I mean, some of these below the rim guys, but just fundamentally sound. They play together. They're connected. That they can beat the more talented teams, if you will. And so much of it too is, the draft boards. Yes, sometimes it's off production, but a lot of times it's off potential. How high of a ceiling do you have? You see it at Tennessee, a team we're all very familiar with on this show, Keon Johnson, who has a huge ceiling. However, we're not talking about the NBA draft when it's March Madness. We're talking about, 4-year proven productive guys that you're going to get game in, game out. And Loyola Chicago has those guys. And all coaches you talk to, whether it's good or bad, they want to know, what am I going to get from each player on a consistent basis? Whether you can't shoot, just don't be a good shooter. So I know I can plan for that. If you can play good defense, do it every game. So I can plan for that. Porter Moser has that consistency with his team.
Dane, when you see what Mark Few's been able to accomplish at Gonzaga, and this is a discussion we had on our show, but you look at Porter Moser and what he's done at Loyola Chicago, if they can fend off Indiana or other jobs that are definitely going to come after him, could Loyola Chicago become the Gonzaga of the Midwest if they're able to keep a coach like that? And are we seeing now in college basketball where maybe it's becoming a little bit more likely for a guy like Moser to stay at a mid-major like Loyola Chicago?
Yeah, money talks. And so I don't know if they can become the Gonzaga necessarily, but the programs and the amount that they can pay in the 7 figures, it's no longer such a no-brainer to move up to that Power 5. Yeah, you can get more millions, but it also makes that coach consider, hey, I'm making pretty good money now. Is it worth living a different sort of lifestyle and the pressure as opposed to doing what I love, which is coaching ball making a bunch of money, and I don't have to pretend to go for greener pastures. And I think so much of that has just come down to the fact that these mid-major schools can throw out pretty sizable, healthy salaries for these coaches. And so I don't know that they can become the Gonzaga necessarily. Mark Few's been doing this a long time. It's amazing. I mean, I remember watching Dan Dickau back in the day when they came to Memphis for one of the regionals. And so it's just amazing the consistency that he's been able to do it with. And I think some of it, yes, the money's involved. And I'm not saying every coach that goes to a Power 5 school has a bigger ego necessarily, but that's for some coaches. It's not for others. Some coaches just say, look, I don't want to be at every Rotary club. I don't want to be, the greatest thing in the whole community and being asked to do X, Y, Z constantly. I just like kind of being in my smaller bubble here where I can still compete for a Final Four, which Loyola Chicago, VCU, all those schools have now shown that it doesn't have to just be betting on a once-in-a-lifetime Cinderella run. You can do it multiple times throughout your coaching career if you stay put.
Dane Bradshaw of the SEC Network with us on Outkick 360. Dane, for all of the upsets that we've seen, do you predict a fairly predictable finish here with Gonzaga up top, Baylor, Michigan, Alabama? Or were you about to see the higher seeds take over?
No, I don't. I think the cream rises to the top. I agree. I think the higher seeds do take over, the ones that have been consistent throughout the course of the year, which for the most part Michigan has been. Baylor was a little bit of a rough start after they had their COVID shutdown and disruption, and Gonzaga obviously has been wire to wire. I mean, the most interesting part to me is all the double-digit seeds that you have on the bottom right of the bracket. Then you've got Houston, Syracuse. Look, one of those teams is going to advance to a Final Four. But even in that case, I still lean towards the lower seed of Houston with Kelvin Sampson. But it's funny because every fan base understands that March Madness is all about upsets and expect the unexpected. But it's inexcusable for it to ever happen to their team. So, even as these brackets go on, it doesn't make any fan base any more patient, even knowing what's coming.
So, Dane, let's look at the SEC teams that are left in this tournament, and a couple of second-year head coaches in Nate Oates at Alabama and Eric Musselman at Arkansas doing outstanding jobs. Starting with Alabama, seems like the perfect mix of roster he inherited along with guys he brought in that fits perfectly with his system. When you look at this team, I think right now they're the second-best team in this tournament outside of Gonzaga. What do you think about the job Nate Oates has done in such a quick time in Tuscaloosa?
He's been awesome, man. I've had the benefit of covering them a lot, and he's so great with his accessibility. At shoot-arounds, film, giving you breakdowns of what their game plan is, and you kind of get to see just how detailed they are. He's huge on the analytics and studying what the NBA does, and it really doesn't surprise me. I actually had them going further last year. I thought they would have been in the top 3 or 4 in the SEC. All that did not click. They lost Kyra Lewis, lottery pick. But last year is the best thing that ever happened to them because they proved they could score 80 plus a game, but the roster also realized that might not be enough to win because they couldn't stop anybody. So the entire offseason during the COVID shutdown, all that, it was them having Zoom calls about defensive breakdowns, defensive clips, and it helps when the head of their snake, Herb Jones, is a defense-first type player. He's the player of the year in the SEC and defensive player of the year. So when everybody embraces that identity is where you see these results. But Nate Oates, I think he has got a great balance of not just saying, hey, we're going to outscore you, we're a run and gun style. They have what's called hard hat points, the blue collar award type stuff within their system. And you're seeing that pay dividends because what makes them so great is the fact that even when they're not shooting the ball well, other teams are hanging in there with them, but that team cannot get any separation. It's usually a 2 to 4 point lead, but then you blink and all of a sudden Bama's on a 9-0 run. And it could come from any guy on the court. And it's really interesting if you talk to him, a lot of it goes back to his Detroit Romulus days as a high school coach. They got beat in the first round of a state tournament or regional, whatever it was. And from that day on, he said, look, I'm never going to not have 5 guys on the court that can pass, dribble, and shoot, which breaks it down pretty simply. Now, their offense is more complicated than that, but that's the premise of it. Can you pass, dribble, and shoot? If you can't do all 5 of those things, whether you're the point guard or the center, you can't play. And so that's where they had some of the roster turnover this year, where you had some big men. They just played against one of their former teammates from Maryland, Galen Smith. They let a kid go to Mississippi State, and within the conference, which is rare. But he said, "Look, we're not going to be a good fit for you. You need to go to a school that has more traditional post." And I'll rant a little bit more because you guys are probably like me, the old school. If you were told to go coach a little league camp right now, you'd probably start off with triple threat. Like everybody knows triple threat fundamental. Nate Oates says, we get that out of their system. You have half a second to pass, shoot, or dribble. And triple threat takes half a second. So we got to get that out of their system. And if you watch Alabama play, man, they get the ball, they rip it through or take the quick shot. So none of the old school triple threat that I always thought was a must-have at the fundamental stage of basketball.
Speaking of going back to our childhood era, Dane, Arkansas and Eric Musselman and the job he's done. Crazy to think that it's been 25 years since they reached a Sweet 16, and now Musselman does it in year 2. I think back at Corliss Williamson and Scotty Thurman and those great Nolan Richardson teams, and it's crazy to think it's been a quarter of a century since they've been to this round. But what a job Musselman has done. What is his style, and how did he get it working so quickly with the Razorbacks program?
Well, and in different ways, he inherited a pretty good situation too. And I hate to ever lead off with that point because it acts as if you're devaluing something, but it's not. I mean, these coaches came in and did a job that the previous coach either didn't do as successfully or wasn't able to capitalize on. In Musselman's situation, he inherited a great recruiting base in that in Arkansas's backyard, they had all like a once in a lifetime type recruiting base led by Moses Moody. But they came in and they signed all those guys. So you got to give them credit there. And now you're seeing the production they have on the court. But then he's filled it with a bunch of transfers. However, I'll say this, whether you look at Kentucky or other places across the country, this is a year where we give everybody a pass, rightfully so, for freshmen and newcomers not having an opportunity to gel and get that chemistry in the offseason, all those things. Yet somehow Eric Musselman has found a way to do that, where this roster is not experienced in terms of playing together, whether that's because they're freshmen or because they're transfers. Yet you look out there on the court and you would think these guys had been playing together since they were in 7th grade. They play hard. They're accountable. There was an article earlier, I think today. I apologize for not being able to quote the source, but I had their game earlier in the season. They got smacked at LSU by like 30. And they had a quick turnaround against Alabama, which obviously hottest team in the SEC. And Eric Musselman said, he goes, look, we probably are going to look really bad against Alabama because we practiced so hard the other day. He said, I had a choice, either prepare our best for Alabama coming up or lay the foundation and standard that what we did at LSU was completely unacceptable. And that's what they decided to do. And they came out flat against Alabama. They looked bad. They took it on the chin. But it was that practice that they had that a lot of the players are pointing back to that said, you know what, that was our wake-up call. That was the most important practice we had all season. And so I really applaud him. He does some interesting things, too. You talk about accountability. He has guys stand up in front of the others in the film room, and he'll literally say, all right, rank the hardest working players on the team, 1 through 10. And so it's out there. And there's nothing behind closed doors, and guys know where they stand with each other. And I think that's part of why you might see their chemistry and their bond being at a little bit accelerated pace than you see other schools right now.
We're chatting Sweet 16 headlines and matchups with Dane Bradshaw of the SEC Network.
Different circumstances, different teams, different experience. But I want to get into Villanova and Michigan dealing with losses of players. So Jay Wright without Colin Gillespie, Juwan Howard without Isaiah Livers, find ways to adjust without those guys and advance. Villanova, I think, particularly impressive. Only 12 turnovers in 2 games against traditionally pretty good defenses while scoring. And Michigan, in a tournament where good seeds drop, find a way to advance into a game against Florida State.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I didn't watch as much, admittedly, on the Villanova game. I was locked into the LSU Michigan one. Um, and LSU was putting up some points. People might not agree with their style of play. It's a lot of one-on-one baskets, but they got some guys that can go that'll be playing at the next level. And Michigan, I thought Michigan was entering a danger zone there where they were kind of playing LSU style. But man, even without Livers, they showed that they could beat LSU at their own style, and it was a high-scoring affair. But they had guys all over the court knocking shots down, making plays. And look, you might say, okay, well, LSU, that was an 8 seed. Look, LSU had a ton of talent and much better than just your typical 8 seed. And the job that Juwan Howard has done has just been remarkable. They've got according to Ken Palm, they're top 10 in offense and defense efficiency. That to me is the big separator a little bit, whereas Villanova not as efficient on the defensive side, but they control the game with their tempo. They'll slow it down. And look, you got to give your hats off to Jay Wright as well, who just you get so used to seeing him this far in March. But as you look at like the top 20 paid coaches in the country, and Chad, you're very close to the Tennessee fan base. People are upset that Rick Barnes in Tennessee didn't advance further. But my message has been, hey, yeah, the guy's making $5 million a year, but go look at the other guys that are making about that much and who weren't even included in March and who's not even advancing. There's only a couple guys in the top 20 that are advancing, and that's Mick Cronin at UCLA, who have kind of put on a Cinderella run of their own, and Jay Wright, who we're talking about now. So not Calipari, not Krzyzewski, not Chris Beard isn't still in this thing. Roy Williams, Izzo, Pearl, Buzz Williams. I mean, these guys are making some big money. And not to say that those guys aren't worth it. Everybody has a down year, especially this year. But, I think even more credit goes to Jay Wright for just being able to have that consistency in his program, no matter what gets thrown at him.
Wick and Suggs, and maybe there's someone else. Which player still remaining in the field do you enjoy watching the most?
Yeah, I'm a pass first guy. I love Suggs, just the way he can pass the ball and how quick Gonzaga gets their shots up. I mean, they get down the court and they get high quality looks just right away. So offensively, and a thing of beauty, I love watching Suggs play. Keeping it in the SEC, I'm biased, but I still, this isn't necessarily one player, but this Alabama team, they truly do have so many different weapons, and that's part of the intrigue to me when I watch those guys play. Is Herb Jones, their star player, was on the bench with foul trouble last game, and that's when they made their big run. They had a kid, Alex Reese, comes off the bench and makes back-to-back threes. You just don't know who's going to provide that 6-0 to 12-0 spark, and their balance is terrific. On the Arkansas side, kid Justin Smith, transfer from Indiana, not even on the SEC list or all SEC team. Everybody felt like maybe he was snubbed. Is he sort of the perennial glue guy of the SEC? But you look at the numbers of Justin Smith's putting up there. If they named an all-tournament team right now in the NCAA tournament, this dude's a first teamer. He has been absolutely incredible. And so I'm not a huge guy on the transfer market, but it is neat to see guys like that have to make a change in their careers and be able to have the success. So, and admittedly, look, I keep it focused on the SEC some with my expertise, because all my games are SEC. I could tell you a lot more about Vanderbilt's 8th and 9th man on the roster than watching all the Gonzaga games. So I'm having fun right now being able to just kind of enjoy as a fan and watch Michigan Gonzaga. I've gotten to see them a little bit throughout the season, but again, like I said, I think the cream rises to the top. I'd love to see Juwan Howard all these years later get back to the national championship, see if he can't redeem the Fab Five. But there's a big part of me rooting for Mark Few and Gonzaga as well.
Well, Dane, let's get to the SEC also in our alma mater in Tennessee. You mentioned it, Vols fans disappointed with this season, especially the way it finished against Oregon State. You look at Rick Barnes, he's had so much success developing guys. When he had that, senior-led team, veteran-led team with Grant Williams, Schofield, Jordan Bone, and those guys had a lot of success. Now they're getting some one-and-done players, not as much success. going that route. Does it feel like the Rick Barnes program is sort of at a crossroads of what they want to be and having an identity moving forward? And how much change do you expect with this program going into next season?
I wouldn't call it a crossroads necessarily. I mean, look, they had a roller coaster year, but still managed to get a 5 seed and what was a wild year for many programs. So did they end on a high note? No. But I think one of the things that you learned was the importance of point guard play. Look, Jaden Springer was great. Keon Johnson, great. But even when they were undefeated for non-conference play, I felt like my biggest concern was, but they got a lot of guys that can play point guard, but they don't have anybody that can thrive at point guard. And Santiago Vescovi, good, hardworking player, can knock down the open shot, but just a sophomore. I wasn't ready to say Tennessee had elite point guard play. And I think that was an issue throughout the season, is they never got that. And as a result, you see their offense not operating as well and very inconsistent. And then when you match that up with the fact that they had such inconsistent play down low, with John Fulkerson and Eve Pond struggling in their senior years offensively, it was just a mixed bag of results. And you hope that the freshmen could be that answer, but instead of them being part of their offense, they became their offense. And that's where you got into the danger zone, as you saw there. But I think they've with Kennedy Chandler, the top point guard in America out of Briarcrest and Memphis, coming in to play next year, I think he'll solve the point guard problems. And then I don't think Rick Barnes is going to budge on his preferred style of play, which is getting that ball at the elbow, low block, and operating it through there, despite having good guard play. They're going to be needing, Grant Williams 2.0, whether that comes through the transfer market or through the recruiting class. So, I still think all things considered, they had a good year, not a great year. I think was frustrating for the fan bases. At times you saw the potential where you felt like, hey, this team could make a good run. And then from my standpoint, I thought they checked 3 key boxes entering the NCAA tournament. How was your conference tournament momentum? They won a game. They performed well against Alabama, got their confidence back. Did they get a good seed? I thought they got a very generous seed. Did they get a good matchup? Thought they had a generous matchup. And so when you see those things line up and then come out and play the way they did, obviously it's frustrating for the fans and the coaching staff.
Dana, part of the March Madness is conference comparison, and we're seeing nationally the conversation about the Pac-12, and rightfully so, with the great job they've done in the tournament, the Big Ten and how quickly their teams diminished, and then the SEC's right there in the middle, not getting much discussion. But it wasn't that long ago that we were having a hard time finding 4 tournament-eligible teams in the conference, and then the mandate was laid out that this conference must improve on the hardwood. What have been your thoughts on the development in that area across the conference and the direction that the SEC is headed in basketball?
Yeah, and I hate to draw conclusions on conferences based on the NCAA tournament. They either showed up to play and they won, or they got beat, but it doesn't truly give you a grade on each conference. And I'm not here to say the Big Ten was a complete bust. But bottom line is they just didn't perform well in the NCAA tournament. Does that mean the Big Ten's not one of the top conferences in America? Absolutely not. But it can help the narrative. And going back to what you said, that the SEC really benefited from that several years ago. I forget the exact year, 16, 17 maybe. South Carolina's Final Four run. I started with the SEC Network in 2014, and man, those were like that studio session was always walking on eggshells, because all you could talk about really was Kentucky, a little bit of Florida, and then everybody else, it was like apologizing for their rebuild situation, or wait till they get these recruits in, wait till this coach builds his brand, all that stuff. And a lot of even though there was improvements being made in the SEC, the facilities were getting upgraded, the scheduling was getting upgraded. Starting at the top in the conference, they were giving much more attention to what needed to be done. And then the budgets improved to hire some of the big name coaches. But even with all that, you weren't going to get the immediate results, whether it was Frank Martin taking 5 years to get to the NCAA tournament, making his run. Bruce Pearl took, I think, 5 years to get his. Rick Barnes took a few years. So all these things took time. But I do think that South Carolina run really got the attention of other people to say, okay, maybe it's not just about Kentucky, Florida anymore. And this year, I would have loved to see the SEC. I thought they could get as many as 4 teams to the Sweet 16. Would have been a great thing to hang your hat on. But the other part of that is to say, yeah, but at least the 2 we got are 2 that you don't normally expect to see in there. That's Alabama, Arkansas, and not having to just rely on Kentucky to carry the brand of the SEC that they had to do for so many years.
Great discussion today with Dane Bradshaw of the SEC Network, former Vol, of course, White Station Spartan as well. Dane, always great to catch up with you, man. We really enjoy your work and appreciate the time here on the show.
Anytime. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Dane.
Dane Bradshaw has been our guest. Follow him on Twitter at Dane Bradshaw and check him out on the SEC Network.
One point out of that I just want to pick up on, and I like that he said it, and I don't want to be an apologist, but I tend to agree with what he's saying about conferences. It's a great storyline and narrative, right? Where a conference comes in the tournament and either achieves much more than it did in the regular season or underachieves compared to what it did in the regular season. But I think we tend to underrate the variable of the tournament, right? If Oral Roberts, I'm trying to think of who teams lost to, right? But if Ohio State and Illinois and Purdue, did they underachieve? Sure.
Illinois faced Loyola, for instance.
Okay, but Illinois runs into Loyola also, which is just partly it got a bad draw, right? Does that make Illinois terrible, an underachieving story? I don't think so. Illinois is a very good basketball team.
No, they won their tournament.
So if you swap out Illinois and Oregon, Oregon's gone if it runs into Loyola, right?
Sure.
And Illinois is still playing. So it's a simple flip, right? And then the narratives aren't as strong. So I think we really want to rank conferences based on who's left in the Sweet 16. But if you flip 2 teams, 2 lines, and they run into the different conferences run into the wrong teams in the brackets, the narratives get watered down all of a sudden, and it's pretty easy to change.
Coming up on Outkick 360, if you're new to the show, if you're a season ticket holder for
Taste
the show,
it again for the first time.
There are stories that make up the fabric of our friendship and why we've been together for 9 years and how many stories we can go back to. There are classics along the way that we'll reference, sometimes as inside jokes, that need some discussion in advance so everyone can be in on it. And the setup is simple for the next story from Paul Kuharsky. At 2 o'clock in the morning on 2 years ago, he awoke and there was a naked kid on acid in his living room. That story is next on Outkick 360. Coming to you from Studio G in Nashville, Tennessee at the glorious Blackbird Studios here in Nashville, and the Blackbird Academy online at theblackbirdacademy.com. If you are a prospective student, if you are passionate about audio, studio engineering, whatever it might be, check out theblackbirdacademy.com for more information. And check out Blackbird Studios, over 14,000 square feet of rehearsal space, 9 state-of-the-art studios. Just talking about them doesn't do it justice. Across the country, this is regarded as the level 10. This is as good as you can get. Blackbird Studio getting it done for us, and we certainly appreciate them hosting the 360 studios for Outkick. Paul, there have been some requests over the last 8 days, this is show 9, for the Naked Intruder story, which is an all-time classic for our show over the last 9 years. There are tentpole stories that we are going to reference over the next decade. And
this is the tentpole. This is the tentpole to start.
This is one of them.
And my sign-off has been incomplete. We got to the don't block the box. There is a second piece of the sign-off, which I'll begin today after I share this story. I know Jakob and Lance are very anxious to hear the story, which has some humor to it now in hindsight, but was not at all funny on the night that it occurred at 2 o'clock in the morning in my Brentwood residence. I was asleep in front of the TV in our bonus room. My son had a habit at the time, I think he was 9, of falling asleep or spending too much time in his parents' bed, which was a fortunate thing on this night when his mother scooped him up upon hearing someone enter our home downstairs and took him into the master bathroom and screamed, "Paul, there is someone in our house." I did not have my glasses on or my contact lenses in, and I raced as a dutiful father and husband downstairs where I heard a commotion, got to the bottom of the stairs. I'm in a daze, right? I've been asleep. And there's a woman who looks a lot like my wife at the bottom of the stairs, addressing a naked guy who's standing, you know, at the far, if you're at the bottom of my stairs, the front door is to the right, you know, a window near the back door to the left. This guy's up against the window. And this woman is screaming at him, "Do you live here, sir?" I'm screaming, "This man doesn't live here. What the bleep are you doing in my house? Get out of my house." You know, going crazy. But I'm completely confused as to what's going on. This guy's acting crazy. She's got a taser pointed at him. I'm still thinking it's Teresa. I don't know what's going on. It seems like forever that this standoff is going on. And ultimately, I'm standing with this policewoman, and there's this showdown happening. Something bad is about to happen. And he ultimately charges us. For some reason, my obsession is with getting this man out of the house. The front door remains open. And the solution to me seems not to capture him or for her to get handcuffs on him, which I don't realize she has, or anything like that. I got to get this guy out of my house. I got to get him out of my house. I got to get that door closed. So she's kind of wrestling him up top. I am trying to pin his kicking legs. He knocks me into the wall. He knocks me in the face. She tases him, which, as a result of me having hold of his legs, tases me. So I'm already dazed. Now I'm dazed and tased.
I forgot about the mutual tasing.
It's a wild thing. My wife is on the phone with the police upstairs, knowing that this is a police officer. I don't know that.
And the police know that's going on at the time.
Well,
right?
She's a policewoman.
You still think it's your wife?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing much thinking about who it is or what's going on at this time, but only after we finally collectively subdue him, and I've got his legs wrapped, which are kicking ferociously, and we've got him on his stomach, and she's finally got his arms, and I've kind of got his legs, and she's got his arms done, and she reaches to her shoulder to talk into her shoulder thing, and that's when her head turns, and I'm like, where Hutton is, and I see her face and realize she's talking into her shoulder, and I'm like, this is a bleeping cop.
This is no dream.
So this whole thing is like a wild flurry. You know, we checked like what time Teresa made the call to the police when she went into the bathroom, and what time she hung up only when I came upstairs, and it was like 3.5 minutes. This whole thing happened in 3.5 minutes. You know, police show up. They give this guy a shot of whatever the huge sedative is to calm him down because he's so crazy. He's still flailing like a
What's he
fish
saying?
in
Is
a
he saying
boat.
anything?
Nonsense. You know, it's just crazy nonsense. But in the meantime, police cars show up and a fire truck shows up. And the fire truck is effectively blocking my house from the 2 neighbors across the street that we're friends with, who are left to stare through the fire truck contemplating what happened. One thought I had had a heart attack. Another, I can't remember what their prediction was, but they're waiting a long time until they can hear what happens. It turns out this kid was on an acid trip from the neighborhood over where there was a party. If you take a lot of acid, apparently, it makes you really hot. And so it's not uncommon for guys or people on a big acid trip to release themselves of their clothes because they're so damn hot. So he parked his car.
Themselves of their clothes.
He parked his car somewhere in our neighborhood and released himself of his clothes. Somebody who was house sitting for somebody in our neighborhood called the police. This policewoman came and was tracking him. She got out of the car to chase him. And we think he was merely running from her and maybe trying doors. Now, my door is not, there's not like a particularly big entryway to my door. Some have, you know, a couple steps you would have to take to get to the door. I've got a little bit of a porch, but the door is pretty accessible. And somehow while I set the alarm, I forgot to mention the alarm is going off during all of this, but the door wasn't locked.
Those alarms are not quiet.
Okay, so
Very
I've
loud.
beaten myself up for 2 years over not having locked this lock. All right, so it's a funny story in hindsight, but I'm tormented over how I didn't handle this.
And you came in the next morning.
Well, the next morning was a Sunday.
The Titans game.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a regular season game or preseason. It might have been like a hot preseason afternoon game, that 3
think
o'clock
that's
game
right.
in the sun.
I think
We
but
didn't
you-
know what to do.
You
Simon
came in with
ended
a
up
black eye.
going to his soccer game. Vrabel made fun of my black eye, and I said, actually, it's not that funny.
We still may have a photo of the black eye.
Yeah. And my kid wound up obviously traumatized in a longer thing. One of the things he associated very much with this, we tried, you know, we didn't know what to do the next day. We tried to behave normally. We said, hey, do
Right.
you want to go to your soccer game? He said, yeah. Then he ended up quitting soccer. He just restarted after 2 years. And the person that he talked to a little bit who helped him through this, she told us at one point the things that he connected with the break-in, soccer was number 2 on the list from having played that day in that game. So, long story long.
Who was the intruder?
My sign-off is don't block the box, but do lock the locks so that you don't forget to lock the locks. Every night we go through a ritual. Are the doors locked? Is the alarm on? Yes, it is. This kid was a student at Ravenwood High School. I did not go to his court hearing. I didn't feel a reason to open this up for myself. He got some very strict probation. He wrote a letter. I made it clear I did not want to know his name. He signed it with his initials. He said he wanted to meet us in person or meet me in person to apologize. I had no interest in anything that would open it up further for me in seeing him. I would like still, if I saw him, to say, you know, I got a kid that I fear as a 23-year-old is going to wake up in the middle of the night and think about the break-in at our house, and I'd like to still punch him in the head. And I'm not a man for violence.
Did you get a good shot in on him while he was scrambling on the ground? Do you remember anything
Well,
of that?
I wasn't up where another thing I think of in hindsight is I should have squeezed him in the sack as hard as I could. Right? Or
You got to
kicked
fight
him.
dirty
Yeah.
in
Kicked
that
him there.
moment.
That would
for
have
sure.
subdued him. But I was really concentrated on the lower legs. I was like
Yeah.
at the knees.
And he needs you at one point, right? Or kicked you?
Yeah, there was so much flailing.
Yeah, you
I
just
don't
got
know
hit by a
what
flailing
hit me.
leg.
Just something
Was there
hit me.
and I've never thought to ask, was there like a trail of clothes where you could see?
No,
where he
I
had
mean
been?
those clothes were
In the
at
neighborhood
the car
somewhere.
or in the neighborhood, strewn about the neighborhood somewhere.
That's what I mean, like down the
don't
street?
know.
Was there
I
a
have
cop
no
going by
idea.
and picking up? Oh, here's a pair of pants, and then 100 yards later, here's the underwear.
But then I did
and
have
here's a shirt.
I had periodic episodes like on the Nextdoor app. You guys on the Nextdoor app in your neighborhood?
No.
You know, and somebody was bitching about kids stealing, political advertising signs. And I'm like, boy, we sure are willing to call out the kids for these little mischievous behaviors. But when there's an acid party going on in the adjacent neighborhood, nobody's saying a word. So let's have Junior burst into my house naked and scare the shit out of my family. He would have gotten shot in 7 out of 10 houses in Brentwood. But nobody say a word about that. But if somebody moves your sign, let's have a 25 post conversation about that. That's getting to the bottom of what's going on in our neighborhoods.
We have long said, you bring up a good point, Paul, in Williamson County, that kid is dead if he goes into the wrong house.
Especially that time.
And yes, during that time, that would have been a moment that...
Around 2 a.m., right?
Yeah.
He's very lucky that he rolled into your house.
yeah.
Because
My wife
someone
has
that's
long
packing
said
at that
that.
point, that kid's dead.
My wife has long said that. He chose the right house. It turned out fine. Everybody was all right outside of a black eye. The police handled it terrifically. Brentwood police were amazing. And, the kid made a huge error. I don't know what the status of his life is, but I know he's not dead. And there's not blood splattered on the back window of our house, forcing us to have to relocate.
Well, he's.
But
Hopefully
here's
he's
the
off
thing.
the
Here's the thing with your kid, though. He comes to you with nightmare scenarios like any kid does, and you say that will never happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And then this happens,
That's
and you
tough.
can never again say that will never happen because he says, "Well, what about that break-in
The
happened?
naked intruder the one time.
Yeah, what about that, Dad?"
The naked intruder.
Now I have to one final touch. I have another story that we'll tell someday that involves Key West and naked gay guys. And so
That is a hell of a tease.
I've
A
commingled.
hell of a tease.
I've commingled the stories a few times.
That'll be on the Outkick 360 OnlyFans page.
Right.
Yeah,
That
that's
story
right.
will be told there.
I don't know if you were around for this chat or not. I think you were, but Hutton, I'm sure,
Oh.
remembers this. I've commingled the stories a few times, and when we referred back to the naked
Intruder.
acid guy,
Yeah.
I've said the naked gay guy because I have the other story in my head. This guy, I have no idea what his sexuality was.
No acid
I don't
involved
care.
in this story. The second one.
But to be clear, I don't know that he was gay or not gay. And if I ever slip and call him the naked gay guy, it's only because I'm slipping into the other Key West story that we'll tell another time.
We will need Matt Mayoko on
Yeah.
Outkick 360
Covers
for the
49ers
retelling of that
very
story.
well. So I hope the story lived up to the promise. It's a sad tale that winds up being humorously told. And don't block the box, do lock the locks. You'll hear that at the end of the show. That's what it means.
Lance and Jakob, what do you think of the payoff of the naked intruder on acid?
My favorite part was that Paul was most worried about having to shoot somebody, and then
Yeah.
because he'd have to move. That seemed to be the reasoning.
The first thought was, we found the perfect neighborhood, and now
No.
I'm going to have to splatter
I don't-
someone's
I
brain on
don't
the
wanna
wall,
shoot
and we're going to have to
anybody.
change neighborhoods again.
I don't want to shoot anybody.
John
no
Rich
matter
moved
what.
me out of my last house. That's another story that'll
Oh.
come at some
I'm
point.
not a gun guy.
And then,
Maybe John Rich will be on this show.
Lance?
I like how you confused the policewoman for your wife and then she tased you.
Yeah.
so many great
The thing
nuggets
is
in that
also,
story.
there's a crowbar under my side of the bed, but I wasn't in my bed. So it was. I need to put it under my Barca lounger in the bonus room also.
Unbelievable story.
Great job, Paul.
Now
The
I've relayed
naked
that. I might
intruder.
not be in tomorrow. I've re-traumatized
Hashtag
myself.
dazed and tased is going to be trending on Twitter. Coming up, the Tennessee Power Hour on Outkick 360. Check us out, YouTube, podcast, of course, after the show on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you download your podcast. We hope that you'll share the post on Facebook if you're watching there. Give us a subscription on YouTube. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. And on Twitter, hit the retweet button. We're back with more Outkick 360 on the Outkick Network. Outkick 360 and the Tennessee Power Hour with Chad Withrow and Paul Kuharsky. I'm Jonathan Hutton. Glad you're with us across the Outkick platforms, including Fox Sports Knoxville. We kick things off this hour talking all things Tennessee and the Volunteers Pro Day, spring practice also starting today. A lot to get to.
Just coming across, Tom Pelissero of NFL Network says the Cardinals have agreed to terms with Malcolm Butler on a one-year deal. So both Titans' expensive cut cornerbacks have found new homes. I don't imagine Malcolm Butler is getting $16 million guaranteed in his first year the way Adoree Jackson did from the Giants. But Malcolm Butler lining up in practice against DeAndre Hopkins, against who did they sign?
He will relish that opportunity.
A.J.
in
Green.
practice
A.J.
with the
Green.
way he competes.
Yeah. That'd be some feisty training camp.
An eventful defensive offseason for the Cardinals. J.J. Watt and now Malcolm Butler.
They're not going young either.
No.
They're in a go for it now kind of mode, which is a little bit surprising because I think they're still a year away offensively, quarterback wise. Anyway, I think he needs some time.
There's a quarterback battle that begins today for the Tennessee Volunteers in spring practice. We'll get to that in a moment. Pro Day happening today as well. And Trey Smith on full display with the athleticism. Not a big surprise. Those across the state and fans of the Vols know what he possesses. But NFL scouts on hand, about to see what's in store for the very athletic offensive lineman, Chad, who should go fairly high.
Yeah, he's a guy who, at University School at Jackson in West Tennessee, looked like an NFL offensive guard when he was in high school. So he came to Tennessee with 5-star credentials, and just you knew day one he was going to be a starter. He was a freshman starter for the Vols. Terrific player, even better person. Everything that he dealt with the blood clots and the lung issues, that is going to be the biggest question mark for him with NFL scouts. His play, not a big question with it. Terrific player. He is a day one plug-and-play guy on the offensive line. Big question is going to be his health and medical and what goes on there. They came up with a formula and a plan where he could manage that problem and play at Tennessee, which bodes well for him. But that's going to be the biggest question that NFL teams have with him are the medicals. But Trey Smith, terrific player, and I think he's going to do very well with Tennessee's Pro Day today.
And Paul, you brought up a wide receiver who has a chance to make a name for himself there and has already done so with the Senior Bowl.
Josh Palmer, is a guy. I have a file up today at paulkuharsky.com with Blake Bedingfield, our good friend, running through 45 wide receivers. The Titans obviously in great need at the wide receiver position. Josh Palmer, he's got maybe as a kind of 5th wide receiver type now. Obviously could help his stock with a good performance. Another thing we haven't talked about, combine time has come and gone, and we didn't have it. If you're at the combine and everybody's comparing 40s off the same, same scouts, same watches, same field, same surface, all of that, I think you got grounds for comparison there. I still think it's kind of ridiculous that you're arguing over slight differences. But now, if you got a 40 time from Knoxville and a 40 time from Utah and a 40 time from Georgia and all of that, how much do these slight differences in 40 times really matter? And I haven't seen much public debate over them. I don't know what kind of debate you're going to have in a war room at an NFL facility. But I think a minor difference in a 40 time on a wide receiver or on a cornerback is going to lead people back to where they should be, game film and game speed. And I think that's healthy for football, generally speaking. I think maybe it bails out some of the worst scouts and GMs who are over-reliant on clock times, right? And put that too high on the scouting report and don't rely enough on game film, game speed, and all of those kind of reports. But anything to me that diminishes track, workout, combine, 40 times.
The underwear Olympics.
Is good
when you
for
eliminate
the game.
that, it could be good.
And I think Matt Miller, who's one of the best draft guys out there, has written this. He thinks it's going to take time, obviously, right? It's a generational thing. And one of the reasons you stick with those 40 times is the ability to compare to past generations and past people you scouted. But that we're heading towards GPS stuff. and miles per hour that you hit in a game on certain things, and you could compare that to another guy. That to me sounds like a more sensible thing. What do you think?
Well, the analytics over the years will tell you that and show you that if you run anywhere between a 4.4 and a 4.55, the level of separation that you're getting at the next level is virtually the exact same. So,
But fans don't believe that. Most
Well-
fans think a 4.4 and a 4.5 are a mile apart, you would think.
well, they are in the Olympics, which is
Right.
what the combine is.
Right. Yeah.
And-
For Usain Bolt, it matters.
But with pads on and within the
Helmet.
3-yard radius of contact,
On a
where you're-
10-yard route.
it's
15.
not going to make that big of difference. So, the true 4.29, 4.3 guys, open field, huge difference. Those guys go high for a reason.
Compared to the 4.4.
In the 4.5s. But the separation factor for a guy that's a 4.41 to a 4.56 is not that big of a difference once you put the pads on and line them up.
That's why you go back to game film.
Especially if you play
Right.
fast as opposed to play slow. And, we've seen that. Anquan Bolden, who our friend Coach Dave McGinnis knew well, didn't time well. And he played perfectly fast enough to
Give you
have a
another
very
one.
effective
A.J.
career.
Brown for the Titans.
Did not run well.
We're in the
And
Tennessee
he's
Power
fast.
Hour. He's a guy who's not known for his speed and running the 40, but you put A.J. Brown on a football field, and he's running as fast as he needs to.
And he
He's
regularly
running
runs
past
away
from people.
And away from people.
Let's give an example. Today, Josh Palmer ran a 4.53 and a 4.51. That's great. Like that's what he
Good
needed
enough.
to do.
Yeah.
It didn't have to show up and run a 4.3. Now, if he did, he's a first-round
If he
pick.
ran a
I'll
4.6,
also, and
he
I'll
would
also
have
say
been
this. I'll also say this about Josh Palmer. I think he's a really good player, and he's got a good possible NFL future ahead of him.
That's at 210 pounds too. by the way.
But I see that, and he's 6'3", 210, 4'5". It's great. That's
Yeah.
great measurables, right? But I can watch A.J. Brown play at Ole Miss, and I can watch Josh Palmer play at Tennessee, and if I'm looking at the film, I don't care what A.J. Brown's 40 time says. A.J. Brown, if he's head-to-head in a competitive setting, and it's him and Josh Palmer to go score a touchdown, he's going to outrun Josh Palmer. That's the bottom line. That's why I'm with you, Paul, that we need to value the film and what they do in games over everything else. And again, this is not a knock on Josh Palmer. He could be a good player. Didn't get a great opportunity at Tennessee, really in Jim Chaney's offense and with Jarrett Garantano at quarterback, who was wildly erratic throughout his career. So he could be better in the pros than he was at Tennessee, but this is where game film matters.
Yeah, I'd love to see him move away from that, but you get it. The analytics need to come more and more into play for more and more younger GMs to be willing to make a major change like that. And I don't know if there's ever going to come a time where the 40 isn't written somewhere on the sheet. It just is going to go from the top left to the bottom right. Maybe.
Well, I think we're going to get to a point in the scouting process, especially for the Power 5 conferences, where, much like Major League Baseball can measure now the pitch rotation for a pitcher,
Right.
you'll be able to measure, and they probably can already do this, but I'm talking for the NFL level, I'm far more intrigued by how fast you are after the catch in pads, separation speed. Like that. That is valuable for a guy that's 6'1", 210 pounds.
Yeah.
That's where I think it comes into play.
Or on particular routes. If you're
That too.
particularly good at a route, all right,
Yeah.
show me how fast you get here. Show me how fast you get here after a cut.
Well,
And the film will show you that. And with a guy like, a Josh Palmer, for example, it's going to show it against Alabama and Georgia and Florida and some of the best. I mean, he went head-to-head with C.J. Henderson, a year ago. You're going to see them up against guys who are either in the pros now or guys who are going to get drafted high. So the film's not going to lie when it comes to that. Follow us on Twitter, Outkick360. Brandon writes on Twitter, I don't know why, but Trey Smith just looks like a Pittsburgh Steeler. I could see that. There's something about his style, and you could definitely see him in that Pittsburgh uniform. But there's a lot of NFL teams that probably would like to see Trey Smith in their uniform.
the Volunteers are getting a chance to see their scholarship players, at least however many, like 70 scholarship players right now that took the field for day one.
Not enough.
Not enough, Jeff.
Not enough.
Josh Heupel getting a chance to see his team in that practice uniform and eventually in pads. Storyline is, of course, at quarterback, where the anticipated battle begins officially for the new head coach.
Yeah, that's the big one to watch, and it feels like every offseason Tennessee's going into it. Other than, I believe it was Jeremy Pruitt's second season where he named Jarrett Garantano the starter throughout spring, even before spring started, that he was going to be the guy. And maybe that was a sort of the intent was to give him confidence that he didn't possess at the time. There is a big quarterback battle at Tennessee. Hendon Hooker, Harrison Bailey, the former five-star, now going to be a sophomore. Caden Salter, incoming freshman from Texas. And then Brian Maurer, who's on the roster. I don't think factors in as much as those other three, but those are the guys to watch. And the big storyline today is who's not on the roster, and that is Henry To'oTo'o, who is in Knoxville, and Kuharsky Crouch, who has gone through workouts with the team all offseason in Knoxville, not on the roster, remains in the transfer portal. Both guys remain in the transfer portal, but have not announced where they're going. Josh Heupel yesterday in a press conference said the door is open for them to return to Tennessee, but clearly, as of right now, they're not a part of this team.
And the door is clearly open, like the weight room door.
The Henry To'oTo'o thing is weird because I'm hearing that he's going to be working out at Tennessee football facilities but not participating in practice. This is where I feel like college athletics is getting a little bit too loosey-goosey at times. Like these guys, they have such control over what they can do, and they know it now. They all know it. Henry To'oTo'o knows that he can go to any other SEC program and be a contributor. If he goes to Alabama, he's not a star, but he's going to play. Goes to Florida, probably not a star, but he's going to play. If he stays at Tennessee, he is the guy on defense. He knows that. And he knows Tennessee needs him. So Henry To'oTo'o could just show up in Knoxville, pack his stuff up, stick around for a while and say, yeah, I want to keep working out here, but I'm not going to give you any assurances that I'm going to be a part of this program. And if you're Tennessee, you just take it and
Because
say,
you have a chance?
okay. But I mean, it is it's a fascinating question if you're Josh Heupel. Do you play the hard line and just say, screw off to Henry To'oTo'o and not give yourself any chance of the guy coming back and playing for you? And Kuharsky Crouch, knowing you need those guys to have any semblance of success on defense in year one? Or do you play the game and say, yeah, do what you want and hopefully you'll come back? I think it's a fine line to toe. And again, Paul, I can see your face right now. This is not the NFL.
I know.
This is not just
But
we'll just cut him and go sign another guy.
What's it say to the rest of the guys there who are all in?
It's not a great message to send. But again, what did we say with Isaiah Wilson all year? What is the message you're sending but he's a first-round pick? Mm-hmm. It's a terrible message to his teammates that he was on the roster as long as he was. He should have been cut before the season started, almost the way he showed up. And if you're going to want to send a message, but you don't do that with guys you've invested in. Tennessee's invested a lot into Henry To'oTo'o, invested a lot into Kuharsky Crouch, two guys who are five-star prospects coming into Tennessee that play a position where they need depth badly, and they need playmakers badly. So if they're not there, you are piecemealing all year a linebacking core together and even changing positions with guys to try to get bodies into that spot.
But
I don't know what the right answer is. It infuriates me as a Tennessee grad.
What can they
do? If he stays there and decides to go to Florida in 2 weeks, but he's working out at Tennessee?
What can they do to win him over at this point? Like, what's the date? And what do they have to do to win him over? How long can he string them along? To me, there needs to be some kind of timetable that they have.
It's a great question.
I mean, the previous regime, right before Pruitt was fired, they flew across country to meet with him and re-recruit him.
Yeah.
With Kevin Steele. Yeah. They, I don't know what the timetable
because
would be.
you've got to go forward with your alternative plan at some point. I mean, I guess
they're doing that because he's not
anyway,
practicing.
because he's not there.
Right.
But still, those kids deserve at some point to know.
I just think
hey, it's us. It's not him.
I think the term buy-in is used too much.
This is
but
that.
That's
Yes.
what I'm going to be watching in the orange and white game and throughout spring. You're going to need to find the guys who legitimately bought in quickly. It happened immediately with Sam Pittman at Arkansas, and they had some immediate success coming off some very bad seasons. So under Chad Morris, their previous head coach. So if there's immediate buy-in with guys, You're going to know who those guys are on this roster. Clearly, it's not Henry To'oTo'o or Quavaris Crouch right now, but you can understand why Josh Heupel and that staff would want to leave the door open for talents like that to possibly be on the team.
So let's run through, because it's more than just the players that we're discussing and the players that were participating in the pro day today who will not be back on this roster. Wanye Morris is now at Oklahoma, along with Eric Gray. Ty Chandler at North Carolina.
Yep.
At Jarrett Garantano at Washington State. J.T. Shrout is at Colorado. Wide receiver Brandon Johnson went to Central Florida. Jameer Johnson, the offensive tackle, is now at Texas A&M. Keyshawn Lawrence, did he also go with Oklahoma?
He's at Oklahoma.
So they have three
That's
at
a
Oklahoma.
big loss because he's a really good player.
DeAndre Johnson, outside linebacker, is now with the Hurricanes. And Brent Samaglia, the kicker, went to Georgia Tech. I mean, the names there make up the fabric of what this team was last year. Now, you can say all you want about the coaching and the makeup of the roster and whether or not these guys were overhyped or if they were used to the best of their advantage or if they stuck with Garantano too long, whatever. There is a turnover here at every position that you look across as a new coach that inherits this roster that has, give or take, 70 scholarship players as they begin spring practice. I can't help but think that Heupel walks out there today and assesses things with his coaching staff afterwards and says, whoa, this is
Thin.
We knew this was an uphill climb. This is more like a mountain that we're attacking.
Well, and here's where Josh Heupel needs to. I'm going back to my initial assessment of Josh Heupel. Prove it, right? Total wait and see. Tennessee,
right?
And you're going to see now in recruiting, Tennessee has zero momentum in recruiting. None. They're not getting anyone right now. No one's talking about them. But on the flip side of that, Jeremy Pruitt had all the momentum a year ago in recruiting at this time. And Butch Jones was able to create this off-season momentum with recruiting. Tennessee's in a place now where they're no longer recruiting on their name alone. They need to prove it, and quite frankly, that's where they need to be as a program. Josh Heupel needs to go out there in year one. He's been dealt a shorthand. There's no way around it. But prove that you're creative. Get creative with some things. Tennessee fans need to be looking back at the end of next year and saying, even if they're 5-7, 4-8, whatever the record is, and saying, man, they got really creative with that roster. They found a couple guys who were going to be really good players and did some interesting things where it's almost that high school coach mentality that Jeremy Pruitt preached about, where he said they were going to be an advantage a year ago because of the shorthanded nature of COVID-19 in the season, because we're all high school coaches. We're all former high school coaches, so we know what it's like to play the hand you're dealt, and you can't go out and recruit. And that fell flat on its face, and they went 3-7. So can Josh Heupel show some of that? I think he can offensively. What happens on defense is a different story, but you just went through the list, Hutton. They're hurting from a roster standpoint. Those Eric Gray, Key Lawrence, Wanye Moore, you go down the list. There's some really good players that's off that roster now where they're going to have to find some guys to plug and play.
And you said it better than I did right there. You know, I think as we go through the list, there will be those who said, Garantano, J.T. Shrout. You can find a kicker like Samaglia, right? But Wanye Morris and Eric Gray at the top of that list, along with Key Lawrence, who goes to Oklahoma. Those are key contributors that you were hoping you could build around and be a nucleus as you try to get over the hump as a new head coach comes in yet again.
Well, Eric Gray's a star.
Yeah.
You can say what you want about his decision to leave and what his role would have been in this offense and how maybe if he was going to play for Jim Chaney, maybe he should have stuck around and played in this offense because he would have had even better stats with what Josh Heupel would do with him. Whatever the case, he goes to Oklahoma where he's going to continue to be a star. I really believe that. He was a star at Tennessee. That's a problem. Offensive line, I do think there's some potential there. Cade Mays coming back helps. Darnell Wright, another former five-star guy, needs to step it up, but that helps. K'Ron Calbert from Warren County, Hutton's alma mater, he needs to step into a right tackle mode probably for Tennessee to be successful. But they've got some good pieces on the offensive line coming back and the defensive line. I just think that While this first season from a record standpoint isn't going to tell you everything you need to know about Josh Heupel and his staff, I do think this first season is going to tell you a lot about their ability to adapt, because that's something they're going to have to do in this conference, because you're not going to out-recruit. Jeremy Pruitt was a good recruiter. He wasn't out-recruiting Alabama, Georgia, Florida. You're not going to out-recruit those guys. So if you're going to win a title and you're going to surprise some people, you're going to have to get creative at some point. Why not start right in the beginning when you're shorthanded, your roster's not as good, get creative, beat a team or two you're not supposed to, be competitive, develop some guys. That's what Tennessee fans want to see.
And you got to re-energize the guys who did stay and get that buy-in that you were talking about.
right.
And you're getting that buy-in at a time where things don't look great. And guys are looking around at the list of people that you just read who are playing college football but not wearing orange.
Well, Nigel Warrior is a good example of that guy who the previous staff, he was out of the good graces with them, was not being developed. Jeremy Pruitt and company take over. He's great under Jeremy Pruitt.
Fresh
Who
start.
are those guys now for Josh Heupel? Guys who haven't been playing or underperformed under the previous regime, that it's one man's trash is another man's treasure type scenario. The reset will help some of these Tennessee players. Is it Roman Harrison on the edge? Who are some of these guys that they have the raw materials to be a great player that this staff can unlock? That is one of the big questions for spring practice with Tennessee.
Well, a lot more to get to with the Tennessee Volunteers. Tomorrow during the Tennessee Power Hour, we will have the VolQuest Hour with Austin Price. That's coming up tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. When we come back, we'll switch gears, talk Titans. Malcolm Butler now with the Arizona Cardinals. Daquan Jones. Could the Titans still be in the mix to re-sign him to their defensive front? We'll discuss that and more straight ahead on Outkick 360. 360 on the Outkick Network. Tennessee Power Hour is here. Huge thanks to Jacob Swanson, Lance Lee, and the chairman of the board, David Reed. Subscribe on YouTube. Share the show on Facebook if you're watching on Facebook Live. Give us a retweet on Twitter. If you have a Amazon streaming device, if you ask Alexa to search Outkick on YouTube, our show will pop up and play for you there. And hit the subscribe button on the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. The list goes on and on. Wherever you listen to your podcast, download your podcast, please search out Outkick content and Outkick 360. Malcolm Butler has signed with the Arizona Cardinals. The best description I can give for Malcolm Butler is if someone were to come up to me and say, describe the Titans mentality. What is something that the coaches and the organization tried to instill from the top down? I would point to a guy like Malcolm Butler. I think his mentality that he brought in, game out, championship quality, who had been there and done that with the New England Patriots, a guy who had straight earned it, coming from West Alabama and becoming a Super Bowl MVP, which coincidentally he just signs with the Cardinals, where he will play half of his games in the stadium where he was the Super Bowl MVP with the interception on Russell Wilson. I love the guy, like as a player. Cannot say more great things about him when it comes to the pro mentality. And they brought him in after they brought in Logan Ryan. They drafted Kevin Byard. There was a fabric that was built across the team that really was exemplified in the work of the secondary. And Butler came in, stepped in, and wasn't a vocal leader by any means in the public eye, but he held himself accountable and he held his group accountable. And I love the scrappy mentality that it takes to play the corner position. And the play in, play out, you get burned, you get flagged for holding or pass interference. Very next play, he's talking trash with the top receivers in the league. I want that as a coach. I want that as a general manager and some of my top paid guys. Butler brought that. Props to Malcolm Butler, who gets another contract with Arizona, an organization that's loading up on veterans. They now have signed 10 or 11 players now, and the vast majority of them will be 30 years old by the time that the regular season rolls around, Paul.
Thing about Butler for me, when he arrived, I wrote about, I want the Titans, I want any team to pay for special traits, right? Super speed, unbelievable ball skills, a tremendous feet.
A category of elite
Right.
somewhere.
And
Yeah.
Malcolm Butler, to me, as he arrived, didn't have that. And I still think he doesn't have that. He's incredibly feisty. He's smart. He's tough. I don't disagree with your assessment of him at all. You want him on your team. I wrote as he departed that there was more value to those qualities, particularly for this team at that time,
Right.
than I thought. But still, if you're going to get an expensive free agent, I want that trait, or traits, plural, preferably. But he was good for this team. And he'll be good for that team. I don't have a problem with the Titans getting out of that contract at that price, at this age.
It was
It's
expected.
the beginning of the downturn age for a cornerback at about 31. Here's the thing about the Titans. Just go back 2 years. The defensive backfield was an absolute mess this last year. The defense was an absolute mess. Go back 2 years. You had Byard and Vaccaro playing very well. Byard was all-pro level. They obviously had a terrible year this year. And you had Logan Ryan, Malcolm Butler, and Adoree Jackson. That was 5 really good players, better than the sum of their parts together, coached by Kerry Combs, a terrific high-energy coach. They were around him for every word. A special teams period came around. If they weren't involved, and most of them weren't most of the time, once Adoree wasn't returning punts anymore, which was a godsend, they were disciples at the feet of the coach. And that was a terrific bunch. And now, I talked to Byard yesterday. He's the last man standing of
He
that
is.
group. Now they had a slogan. You're going to make fun of it now, considering how it turned out. My man catch no balls. And Byard said
MMC and B.
That's over. We need a new identity and to find out who we are.
It's
and,
over.
And what we do and what
It came to a
and they
fiery
caught.
halt.
And look, even when it's an attitude. Obviously, cornerbacks and defensive backs are giving up catches no matter
It
how
became
good you are.
MMCAB. My man catch all balls.
Yeah, but we weren't factoring in Jonathan Joseph and
Right.
and Breon Borders after teams kind of got a hold of that, and Kareem Orr and Ty Smith, guys who had to
Jonathan
play
Joseph,
a
who
lot
Hutton
last
has a
year.
faster 40 times than Jonathan Joseph.
Yeah,
last time he
40
was caught.
times do count when you're talking about
I don't know about that.
Jonathan Joseph
Let's be honest, he'd smoke all of us still.
at 47 years old. But it just goes to show you how quickly things change. Just 2 years ago, that was a 5-pack that was the heart and soul of this team.
And may I add, just an average pass rush that made them the top defense in the NFL.
Right.
They just had to be average with the pass rush that year.
Yeah. And now all you want, because the Titans have become an offensive football team, if Downing can keep this going and if they can find the right pieces to replace top guys who left, Corey Davis, Johnny Smith, but if the offense can stay somewhat close to what it was, all the Titans need to be, we've talked about this time and time again, is average. If they could be the 16th defense in the league instead of 29th, this could be a very good football team. We talked, I don't know if we ever got it onto air, Jim Schwartz, who retired as the Eagles defensive coordinator, he set a standard in Philadelphia where 16th was as bad as the Eagles would ever be, right? So they could be very good, but if they were going to be bad, that was as bad as it would get, middle of the pack. And middle of the pack is okay if your offense is good. Now in Philadelphia, they made pretty good on that most of the time. And if the Titans could do that, if that could be their formula for the duration of Tannehill Henry Brown as a trio anyway, they'd be in good position. Can you get back to that? They've got to finish replenishing the talent, and Mike Vrabel has to be in the lab with his coaching staff, reinventing what they intend to do and how they intend to do it.
Can they get Daquan Jones back in the mix? This is, we discussed phases of free agency. We've had that top tier now signed across the league. Daquan Jones will be in tier 2. And while there will be teams that will be calling and trying to acquire him, I think if the Atlanta Falcons have the cap space, I'm not sure if they do,
They'd like
it makes a ton of sense to go join Dean Pease and Arthur Smith with a group that he knows and a defense he would fit well. They need him. But the Titans also do. He was one of the more consistent players defensively for this Titans team last year.
Good at what he does, early downs. He wouldn't need to play in the nickel front, if you will, because you've got now Danico Autry, who would play alongside Jeffrey Simmons and rush downs with Dupree and Landry. So Jones now play fewer snaps and be a rundown defender who could rest Autry and or Simmons in a rotation thing there. Hopefully you don't go much deeper than 3. If you do, you're calling on Murchison and Tart, say. That's a decent sounding 5-pack. He's a good leader. He was a defensive captain last year, I believe, for the first time. So he's got the respect of the room. It's hard not to like him. He's a really good guy. And he had some games where he showed up really big, like a super impactful run guy. Doesn't penetrate a lot. He made $7 million a year for the last 3 years. He's projected to make like 7.2, 7.5 by the people who project such things. I don't know if you're paying that 7.5 for that anymore. You could get a kid to do that. Tart could do that, maybe, if you're projecting well. But if he's going to take 5 or 4.75,
Yeah, if he's taking the Jayon Brown deal.
then absolutely bring him back. Haven't heard his name mentioned anywhere. It's just dead for him, seemingly.
Yeah, and I think the
And
Titans.
it could be a while.
The Titans really like him, but for
I would
the right,
imagine they
for the
want
right
him
price.
back unless they saw some signs and they're like he's about to drop off line with him, like they were, I think, with Kenny. They saw Kenny Vaccaro.
I don't think he's that.
He's not that. Kenny Vaccaro already started to drop off, but Kenny Vaccaro wasn't a money decision strictly. Kenny Vaccaro was a play
Well,
decision paired with money.
Let's just compare.
But they had Kenny Vaccaro's solution on the roster in Hooker. They don't have the nose on the roster unless they're all in on
That's
Tier
what I was going
Tart.
to say.
And can you be all in on Tier Tart yet?
You can move him up the rung. You move him up a rung, right?
Move him up a rung. You could move him up a rung and say we'll find another undrafted guy, and between those two guys, we'll be covered. It's not a lot of snaps.
That's
It's not
right.
a lot of snaps.
It's not like the number 2 receiver for Nick Westbrook-Akina getting all those snaps.
That's a lot of snaps.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of snaps.
Oh, coming up, some more thoughts on some local headlines and the dilemma that the Preds will be facing at the NHL trade deadline. That I guess is a good problem to have, but is it for this team? Chad, I think there are some details out about the referee and the microphone being live.
Yeah, there's. I mentioned it yesterday, but that was a Preds broadcast issue also. That the reason that everyone heard that was something to do with the broadcast, and there is a report out that is in fact the case. It didn't take a brilliant detective to figure out that someone screwed something up in the truck.
So backlash?
But that I don't think there's going to be backlash, but
Ooh, a little
as I
docket
mentioned,
check.
I think that it's pretty easy to say that NHL is not going to be pleased with allowing a hot mic to go over a broadcast.
That's fine. It's pretty easy to say the Preds aren't pleased with what was said, whether it was on a hot mic or not. And the league.
Well, and it's pretty
not
easy for the
pleased.
league to come back and say, yeah, and we fired his ass immediately, so shut up. I mean,
it's
that's a
over
pretty
now,
strong. That's a pretty strong response.
It should be over.
And
now.
also, you won 2-0. It's
over
the only
now.
response. So
yeah,
To me, it's over now. But if the league says, "Hey, we're really pissed off about the hot mic," if I'm David Poyle, who's a very civil man, I'd say,
Yes.
it shouldn't be something on the mic that would be so egregious to be heard that if the mic happened to spill into 3 seconds of the commercial break, you'd be horrified to hear. That's the standard your referees should be held to.
we can read some of your tweets as well. At Outkick360 is where you can find us across the Outkick network. Hang with us. Tennessee Power Hour rolls on here on Outkick 360. Outkick.com is where you can find Joe Kinsey's woke all-star bracket. Which,
the
Chad,
way,
you had fun with last night.
I'm sorry, but it is hilarious. The names of the region were really funny throughout. And I'll say this, if I'm a part of the woke all-star bracket, I would have some fun with it because it's very funny, but the people that are in this bracket take themselves so seriously and they think the work that they're doing is so serious that there's no way they're going to laugh at it. And it's not going to be funny to them. But I laughed when I saw it, that's for sure. Dan Wolken, by the way, would be my pick. But it's not
of
really
course.
because of the wokeness as much as
The one-on-one battle?
I just don't like Dan Wolken.
The
Wolken.
one-on-one battle that Chad had at one Titans training camp
He's your
with Dan
media
Wolken.
arch
And
enemy, right?
there's writers in the game that I like, right? That I like their work.
Yeah.
I don't like Dan Wolken. I don't like his work.
He's
I
your
would
media
say,
arch enemy.
yeah, I mean, there's probably some more closer to us that I would say more arch enemy.
Name a
But
name.
yeah, he's the
Wolken's there.
national arch enemy for sure.
Name a local name.
I
Chad's
can't
done
think of
nothing-
one that's more synonymous with me owning them than Dan Wolken. Anytime Dan Wolken comes up and says something stupid, 15 people will tweet me
Yes.
and mention it. Oh, Dan Wolken's at it again. So I think that I'm more synonymous with the public knowing our media dust up
How
than anyone
about
else.
anyone you haven't had a chance to own?
I'm not like Clay in that I have 35 enemies that are constantly coming at him and they're constantly going back and forth.
Anyone
So-
you haven't had a chance to own locally who you consider an enemy?
No,
I have several.
yeah. I think we're going to get to that in a very special bonus hour of the show at some point.
Yeah, I'll name names. I'll give you some initials right now if you want.
Paul, you have a 40 note.
Yeah, so we were talking about 40s earlier, and I just found
There's a guy on the bracket, by the way, who ran a 40. Dan Ravel.
It's true.
God, the most unathletic guy who's
Or as
just
he's
so
re-
eager to advertise.
Or as he's referred to in
His
the
lack of
bracket,
athleticism.
he's referred to in the bracket as Karen Ravel.
Yeah, well, look, there are a lot of people that are unathletic in the media,
Oh.
but they don't go out and videotape themselves constantly being unathletic.
And then defend it.
Yeah, and then say, like, no, actually, it's pretty good. No, it's not. It's not good at all. This is from the 33rd team, which I believe is Michael Lombardi's venture. It's very good. It's growing. It said,
Also known as the Alabama Crimson Tide.
let's note that this is a pro day, and based on the history of Penn State University's pro days, Penn State's average 40-yard dash time is 3% faster than combine results.
Oh, now that's interesting.
So Allen Robinson, they use as an example. At Penn State's pro day, he ran a 4.47. At the combine, he ran a 4.6. So this is something they're saying that scouts generally know. So this puts a premium on scouting. Hey, how much does
Are you
such
saying
and such
James
school-
Franklin might not totally be telling the truth on his players and how fast they are?
I got a Tanzania story to tell you, James.
I wonder
Franklin
if they
said.
can do
So
this for weights.
schools know. Now, how much can you fudge on weights?
No, what they're listed as in the media guide versus
weights.
what they play.
I thought you meant bench press.
No,
I was
no,
like,
no, no,
I
no.
don't know how they're fudging that. That's
Yeah.
a film.
Fake
Those
weights.
are real weights. Yeah.
This guy just did 57.
No,
of
but this is a
225.
good question about your scouting department.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense
$9.99,
of
1,000.
how many schools are pretty true to combine stuff and how many schools vary by a percentage this dramatic on a regular basis? And I bet you good scouts and good scouting departments do, and bad scouts and bad scouting departments do not. But this is a fascinating nugget here, that generally Penn State times guys 3% better, which when you're talking about numbers like this is not an insignificant margin when you go from a 4.47 to a 4.6. That's a difference that qualifies in the parameters
Yeah.
that you were talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
as not inconsequential.
Paul, how's the YouTube chat going today? Are they happy now that we brought up the woke bracket?
I'm out. Yeah, it's probably taken off.
blowing up now.
Finally, Chad is giving us what we've been waiting for.
Chad clears all of his cache and refreshes so he can vote Dan Wolken like 32 times.
Yeah, just
per
over
minute.
and over. We need to update the where the votes are right now because it's getting close to being done with the first round.
Who's doing it?
So Joe Kinsey with Outkick is the one who wrote it, but the funniest line in his story is the ultra-competitive gaslight region. The best are the names. There's the, oh gosh, I don't even know all
is a
these
funny
terms.
name.
The gender binary
Yeah.
region or something like that. The regions are toxic masculinity region. I think Dan Wolken is the #1 seed in the toxic masculinity
We know
region.
somebody else in there that we were at Indianapolis.
Yes,
We had
yes,
to
we do.
protect somebody. against just guys drinking.
Will anyone on this list be thrilled if they win?
No.
Like as a point of pride
No.
that they're the wokest? No?
No comedy chops.
So I'm fascinated to watch what the Predators do at the trade deadline.
Which is when exactly?
April 13th, 16th,
My
something
God,
like that.
The trade talk started so early.
Middle of next
considering
month.
It's
Middle of
still a
next
ways
month.
Away.
And I bring it up now because they're playing really well. Even in their 2-0 loss recently, they had really great goaltending from UC Saros, who's back from injury and again, playing well and has them right there at the playoff line as the backstretch of the season is about to begin. And the question I have, and I'm curious to find out what they do, is how do you prepare for the future? How do you trade assets that you have now that other teams will want to acquire, with the long shot that you could trade a player for a player, which I don't think would happen, versus trading a player that would, in essence, throw in the towel. Like if you trade Philip Forsberg, the message throughout the organization is we're throwing in the towel in the season, we're rebuilding because of the assets we're getting in return. That player and that impact player signals one thing. But if you trade Ekholm for to me, there's a way to go about the restructure and the rebuild without completely throwing in the towel on a playoff opportunity, which is now within reach and within the view of what I didn't think we would see right now.
Well, and here would be another big question for me, and you're right, it's an interesting balancing act the franchise has now with who to trade and what to do, but how much does a playoff trip matter?
That's what I was going to say. Like
I mean,
anything
if you're
happen,
going to go in, your
especially in
percentage
hockey.
chances are still very small. It's not 30% even to get into the playoffs.
19,
so
you said yesterday.
what would it matter to this team to make the playoffs and lose in the first round?
You can go and get on a run with a hot goaltender. That's always the thing. But this team recently in the playoffs has showed us absolutely nothing. And they're
my
very
point being,
satisfied with
let's say they blow it
losing.
up. Let's say they blow it up, they reset, they trade Forsberg, and they're intentionally going to be bad for a couple of years to rebuild. Well, if in 3 years we have this question, and you're asking me how important is a playoff trip to this new group of guys they're rebuilding with, it's very important. I don't know how important a playoff trip to the Preds, considering they go every year.
Well, it's important for John Hines. It's important for David Poyle.
Well, and there goes to the bigger question.
Right.
Are you making plans with those guys moving forward?
Well, you're making plans with them at the trade deadline this year, though.
They're the ones doing the moves.
So how do you? We are agreeing that they need to rebuild. They need to restructure what they're doing. But can you do both? Is it possible to do both?
It's kind of half measures to me. You go full measures, then also, I'm not saying tank, but you go full measures, you get the results you get, then your pick is what it should be. That helps you, along with the picks that you get as a result of what you deal, and you've gone full measures. And then your rebuild is better because you went full measures, because you're getting, hopefully, if you're scouting well and making the right picks, you're getting the value you need. Then maybe you can
here's what's
trade
crazy
some of
about
that
this team, though,
value
Paul.
in a little while for some
Here's
present
what's
day
interesting about this
commodity.
team. You could do both. The only time this team has been praised this year is when they lost stars to injury. And guys started stepping up, and they started playing their younger
Ellie
guys.
Tolvanen.
And guess what? They won 4 out of 5. So who knows? Maybe getting rid of some older stars and letting young guys play is a route to do both, rebuild and make the back end of the playoffs.
I think it's
I know it's a stretch.
relatively small
It's a stretch.
sample size that we've seen
Right.
this. That's all I'm saying, right? I'm not buying 4 out of 5 as being enough to convince me that they've got something based on what I've seen up until now, no matter who's been on the ice.
On the way out today, I'm curious what you guys fell into in the YouTube wormhole last night or this morning. I've got one good one from last night that I spent probably an hour on.
Well, I showed you guys mine. It was Chris Farley running out David Letterman 25 years ago. It was 25
It's a
years
great
ago
clip.
yesterday, where he had his frantic run through the audience and cartwheel up on David Letterman. And then that led into Matt Foley on SNL and a Chris Farley wormhole.
I got stuck in something last night when I was doing some receiver work, but I can't remember exactly what it was.
Like a
which is not
comedy bit
helpful.
or?
No, some receiver stuff, but it
Oh, like
spun
drills.
off of the receivers that I was looking at into stuff that was not relevant to the work I was doing.
I watched a 25-clip playlist of Crocodile Dundee 2 last night.
I like
That we get into to start tomorrow.
I'm a big
Best
Linda.
Special Friday
I'm a big
edition.
Linda Kozlowski fan. What has become of her?
There's a very special scene in the original Crocodile Dundee with Linda Kozlowski.
Bathtub?
No. In fact, I'm pulling it up right now, and I'll show it to you.
I was
The
thrilled with
random
the show.
YouTube wormhole. We'll hit this from time to time because I fall into a pit of misery sometimes. I end up with an hour that's gone
Pit of
by, and I
misery
think,
is,
"What have
Princess Bride.
What have I just watched?" And then
Time
it
flies
brings me
by
back,
so quickly.
Brings me back to the late '80s, early '90s.
I do it on Facebook. I get into videos that I don't even know what magic tricks and
Yeah, me too.
pranks and
Puzzles like the
Yeah, how
to
do you
work out
undo
the
this
puzzle.
thing?
Yeah, that's tomorrow.
those
on the show.
algorithms. I mean, whoever's designing those really is the master of the universe.
Hey, check out Outkick the Show with Clay Travis coming up in 2 hours right here on the Outkick Network. Great job by our entire crew, Lance Lee, Jakob Swanson, the Basalt Bandit, also David Reed, the chairman of the board. Like, share, retweet, subscribe to the show. Thanks for all of the help in spreading the word that Outkick 360 is here. Day 9 in the books. Hope you'll join us for day 10, which starts at noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central. We'll have the VolQuest Hour plus all the headlines of the day right here on Outkick 360.
And on day 9, you finally get the full sign off. Don't block the box, and do lock the locks.